All right, everyone. So we are moving on to our next presentation, and this one is, if I read my schedule correctly, actually going to be about high performance building operator professional certification. So this is going to be Peter, Ted, and myself, and I will pass it over to Peter.
So we're going to give you a very quick summary of where we are with the certification and give you a little bit of information about the content of the certification and how it was developed. Very briefly, the status is we are following ISO 17024. Some of you are familiar with ISO 5001. This is 17024. And it has a lot of very detailed requirements to meet the standard. We have completed a DACM. Then we completed a JTA, which is a much deeper dive into the DACM. And the DACM is an analysis of the skill and knowledge requirements and duties and tasks involved in high performance building operations. We then established a scheme committee, which drilled down on the findings of the JTA and also developed eligibility requirements for the certification and took care of all of that. The next stage was to develop a test bank, and that was completed. And now we are ready to initiate the pilot training itself. And so we are now completing a web application so that people will be able to submit their applications online. They can then be reviewed by staff and eligibility determined. And then from there, applicants will go directly to schedule their online exam. So we're just at the point of getting the pilot going, and everything has taken longer than we expected, but within this month, within the month of January, we are sure that we are going to launch the pilot, and we're hoping that some of you who are in this meeting will be able to participate in that pilot. Next slide. And just a brief background on some of the commercial trends. You can see them there. Much of what we've heard over the last 2 days has reinforced the notion that we are going to be asking more and more from building operations. And with the new requirements coming in, building performance standards, new tools, all of these things are converging on building operations. And we need to increase the capacity of building operators to meet the challenges ahead. Next slide. One thing I want to point out is that commercial construction and building operations are legacy industries. By that, we mean that they have long histories. This is not a new .com startup with a clean slate. They are governed by traditional organizational structures and norms. Patterns of behavior are guided by historical practices. And once a building is built, the transition from construction to operations is also fraught. What kind of documentation was provided? Are buildings fully commissioned, or merely is the equipment merely turned on? How many buildings can we think of that weren't really commissioned? In fact, there's a lot of debate about what commissioning really means. And well, we turned everything on and it worked. The building is commissioned. clearly that's not the way we would define commissioning. Have operations staff been engaged during construction? And have operations staff been adequately trained on equipment and control systems? To dramatize this situation, a director of inspections for a large organization with millions of square feet shared with me at one time, as the director of inspections, he had two separate, very strong pushes coming at him. On the one side, his capital projects, people said, we need to get this new building out quickly, meet it on schedule, on time, on budget, get it over with. On the other hand, his operations staff was saying to him, please, please, if you miss anything on your inspections, we're going to be dealing with that for the next 50 years. So think about that if you're going to cut corners on inspections. This is a very profound thought. The operations staff, for better for worse, and how many times have we heard a chief engineer tell us, I didn't design this building, but I have to make it work. And that's kind of the reality on the ground. Next slide, please. So some of the problem areas we see, legacy practices become deeply embedded in standard procedures, and no one questions them after a while. As buildings are upgraded, those upgrades come in layers. And do the systems communicate with each other? All of these things create more complexity for building operators. The BIS system often is not used effectively because people simply aren't trained to use it. It's a huge area of problem. Technical solutions are superimposed over typical firefighting culture of chronically under-resourced building operations. Peter Senge, many decades ago, in his seminal work on systems thinking, identified addictive behaviors in crisis management. Firefighting is one that becomes deeply ingrained in organizational practices. And how do you prioritize work orders when you're in a firefighting mode? And automated solutions are overridden to address operational needs. Next slide, please. So what are the goals of the HPBOP certification? We're seeking to create a standard for mostly cognitive domain knowledge and skills for high performance building operations. Establish an ISO 17024 accredited certification. So that's why it's taken us much longer than we had expected. You don't know what you don't know sometimes, but at the end of the day, it will be a very valid, nationally recognized certification. We want to develop curriculum guidance for two-year college degree programs and other training providers, and help colleges and other training providers align their curricula with high performance standards and content. Next slide. So just a few notes about how this certification has been developed. It's been built upon a substantial body of knowledge and body of research comparing standard practices with high performance practices. The certification builds upon the traditional knowledge of electrical and mechanical systems that are typical within the industry. And it focuses on the higher level cognitive knowledge and skills that building technicians must use to operate high performance buildings. It recognizes the urgent need to improve the education and training of building technicians. It emphasizes the critical importance of the technician in using BAS systems effectively, as if they're latent, overridden, unused, and building operators are not trained to use them, well, huge potential is lost. The certification is also informed by ASHRAE Guideline 32. And my friend Michael Bobker, really hats off to you, Michael, for taking the leadership in developing Guideline 32 on high performance buildings operation. And that's a really important seminal document that is also very synergistically related to what we're doing with HPBOP. The certification itself has been developed by a national team of practitioners and experts in high performance building operations. Next slide. And I'm going to shift over to Ted at this point.
Sorry, we're presenting. I couldn't figure out exactly where my unmute was. So thank you. Part of this part of the discussion beginning of the day, Rodney had mentioned that the technology, what the administration, what people who do all the finances thinks is going to help with minimizing how many people they need to have in building operations. And the reality is that they've been cutting back on people all these years. And so it's already strapped beyond the point of breaking. And this technology isn't going to necessarily free up people to have not have to have as many people. It's going to free people up to do the job better that they're supposed to be doing. So that's one point I wanted to bring to the front from what Rodney talked about earlier today. And that kind of plays into this trends that's increasing our building system complexity. We need to look at what we have from a building operations standpoint and the people we have maintaining the buildings and provide more education to them. And that's part and parcel what this whole certification process is to help drive home that this isn't our grandfather's buildings or even the buildings back in the 60s and 70s. They're getting more and more complex. We're responsible for more and more things. And we need to elevate the position of people maintaining buildings to a higher level, to this professional level. And that's part of the thought process behind this certification also. So some of these trends is pressure to increase efficiency while going towards decarbonization. And we've been talking about decarbonization these past 3 days quite a bit. And I think if you look at the building operation people, they're maybe some of the higher end buildings are talking about decarbonization, but they're really not discussing it in the majority of buildings. And we want to try to help drive some of that discussion, try to get to the point of looking at decarbonization and have that embedded in what's done at the maintenance level. The availability of BAS and energy management system technologies is just skyrocketing. And we heard some presentations on fault detection today that is just making it even more complex, furthering the need for high performance building operations professional. Increasing the integration of HVAC controls with other building systems. You have fire protection, you have security, access, a lot of other things we can bring into the fold. And there's caveats with that or concerns about doing that, but it's something that is starting to happen more and more. Availability of improved yet very complex sequences of operations. So this touches back on ASHRAE 36, which is the high performance control sequencing standard. I looked it up today, and the ASHRAE journal, there's an ASHRAE journal talked about 36, and it said in that article Custom control sequences for HVAC systems are often dumbed down, limiting their potential to reduce a building's energy use, which harkens back to an often stated phrase, which actually one of the people in the past couple of days mentioned, is that a building operator will lower the level of operation of that building to their level of understanding. It kind of plays into that. And we need to, with this certification, start to up the game so we don't have that happening anywhere near as often. Next one is about data management, fault detection, trends towards building performance standards and enforcement. This is very critical in helping to drive us to more efficient, less carbon consuming buildings. Increased attention to health and safety standards and IAQ. This really was highlighted with COVID, and in past institutes, we had some very good presentations on these issues. Increased need to manage electrical load and grid interactions. A lot of that discussion taking place the past couple of days here. All very important parts of what's happening with increasing complexity of buildings. So the certification is looking at a number of different areas. I think if you look at this list here, you're going to notice that the main thing is that it's not just maintaining operating building as we thought of it in the past. It's analyzing, it's maintaining building efficiency, it's auditing your building performance, not just auditing your building, but auditing the performance on a regular basis, creating these high performance building plans, which takes a lot of time and effort. Looking at managing your building systems, and the word systems is very important there. We want to look at systems and not specific equipment. And then at the very end, you want to be looking at implementing a continuous improvement process. So that's not just a one-time done and out. You want to continually be trying to improve the operational efficiency of your systems. And this takes the level of knowledge that we're trying to target with this certification for somebody to have in order to do it well. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Robert.
Hey, everyone. So as many of you are probably aware, I come at this from the building automation system side. I started in the controls field as a employee of a contractor, and then moved into building operations for our community college here in Omaha. So I've seen this from both sides, both the installation and service side on the contractor side, and from building operations and owners representative side. And the truth is that we ask a huge amount from our building operators. And we traditionally give them basic training on maybe electrical or mechanical systems, but we give them very little training on building automation systems. And the training that we do give is short, sweet, and to the point, and often only happens once at the start of a building. As we deal with retiring workforce issues, we may have building operators who do understand the systems and depart, only to be replaced by new technicians who don't understand the systems, not by any fault of their own, but just because the training isn't there when they are there. So we run into those challenges. And that's one of the things that we're working to resolve with the HPBOP certification, is to provide methodology for them to get that continued training, to be able to use our building automation systems effectively. Because let's face it, as we've seen here in the last 3 days, our buildings aren't getting simpler. They're getting progressively more and more complex. So the understanding of those systems and how to interact with those systems beyond just, the basics of the pumps or the control panel on the front of the boiler is essential. And as we heard this morning, oftentimes the building owners pay for these high performance systems, And they believe because they're building a smart building and or a more technologically advanced building, that they either can hire fewer employees or hire less qualified employees. And, you know, those folks who've been running these buildings have been trying to tell them for a long time that that really is not the case. So there are a lot of different aspects here that we are incorporating into HPBOP. And as Peter said right at the beginning, this is a lot of cognitive skills. So the understanding of how these different parts of the system work, not necessarily the ability to go out and install these systems. We're not going to teach them how to strip wire. We're going to teach them how to analyze the data and discover that you need to replace a component and rely on their existing skills, on the job training, or the similar things to gain those additional skills. So that's what I have. I will pass it back to Peter.
Robert, I think we're out of time. We're now at break. In fact, we're a little bit over. So I don't see any questions.
I don't see any either, Peter.
There's someone that has their hand raised. I'm gonna allow them to talk.
Okay.
Sure.
Oh wait, they lowered their hand.
So we do have one question from Robin here real quick. The challenge seems to be that we have the capacity to develop complex control systems that are far more complex than the systems that we are controlling. Can we evolve the underlying systems enough to decarbonize in time, or do we need a new finer grained approach to HVAC systems? I think you hit the nail on the head, Robin. I don't think anybody has a definitive answer to that, but I think it's, from my perspective, it's going to need to be a multi-pronged approach where, yes, we are going to need a finer grained approach to HVAC systems, but we also need to address the complexity from the control standpoint and the workforce issues associated with that.
And I think some of that too is going back to a comment Steve Taylor made a couple of institutes ago, that the complexity of ASHRAE 36 to implement on equipment and maintain is much like an iPhone, where if you integrate this into the manufacturer's equipment and everything that's taking place, which is going to take a long time, right? Then we'll have that quote unquote cell phone of the future that will be taking care of a lot of these things in the background, but we're not there yet. And it will never eliminate the need for high performance building operations professionals. So. Any other questions pop up, or that pretty much it? And we can go into our break and come back in about 5-10 minutes.
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Okay.
So why don't we do that? We'll just break for now, and we'll see everybody in 5 minutes.
Okay. Thanks, Ted and Robert.
Thank you, Peter.